This week on the Business of Tech, IDC says MSPs aren't going back to the way it was. Man tries to blow up the internet. The FCC adds a speed test tool. Microsoft goes big in healthcare. The FBI hacks Exchange servers, then fixes them. The US sanctions Russia over cybersecurity. A lesson about network latency in esports. And how did they unlock that iPhone 5 years ago? All this and more. Hit that like and subscribe button, and let's dive right in. IDC has a seemingly bold statement. The MSP market will never return to its pre-COVID-19 ways of doing business. That's from Stuart Wilson, Research Director, European Partner Ecosystems. Quoting Channel Futures, "The most important point is to accept we are never going back to how things were pre-COVID-19, he said. The economic situation and the competitive MSP landscape will encourage customers to renegotiate prices, Wilson said. MSPs will see customers asking for new, more favorable contract conditions. Gartner, meanwhile, has a major revision to their growth forecast for 2021, up to 8.4% growth in 2021. Device spending leads the way, followed by enterprise software, IT services, data center systems, and communication services. This is a significant revision from the numbers released just 3 months ago. Now, why do we care? I love a good analyst bold statement and try to make them myself. This one is a bit of an obvious one. Of course things aren't going back to the way they were. Now, I do care because of the outcome. Customers asking for new, more favorable contract conditions. Couple that with ever-continued spending and you get more pressure to deliver, and deliver on business outcomes. The analyst doesn't go into detail on those conditions, so I'll add my take. It's about more flexibility to the terms, and it will be more about how success is measured. Those are obvious statements based on what we've covered prior. It just doesn't make it any less important. In the Physical Security Matters category, FBI agents in Texas have arrested a man for an alleged plot to blow up an Amazon data center in Virginia, per Vice. His reason? To take down the internet. Quoting the article, according to the Department of Justice, federal authorities learned of Pendley's plot after one of his friends warned them. Pendley was allegedly active on MyMilitia.com, a website where extremists gather to socialize and plot, where feds say he boasted about his plans. The source told the FBI that Mr. Pendley allegedly stated he planned to use C4 plastic explosives to attack prominent tech companies' data centers in an attempt to kill about 70% of the internet, the DOJ said. Notably, the attack would not have killed 70% of the internet. Why do we care? It's the interaction with the FBI I care most about. Sure, I'll acknowledge physical security and could have commented more on that. Instead, it's about working with law enforcement. Increasingly, each security story I cover talks about how the court or law enforcement was involved. I continue to believe that for IT services companies, a growing portion of responsibility is management and interaction with both law enforcement and with legal compliance. So much so that it's likely becoming a role within an organization of any size. I'm not assuming that even large IT integrators have fully considered this as a part of the deliverable. Many have a legal team, but are they part of the process? Are they part of the service offering? This seems like the new expertise required. I wanted to cover this to follow up on the thread of stories. Amazon workers in the Bessemer, Alabama plant did not achieve the required vote to form a union. The result, while still unofficial, indicates not enough support for the measure. The Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union has already challenged the results and is on track to file an unfair labor practice charge against Amazon. Now, why do we care? This isn't done, that's why we care. I think it's a mistake to expect this to have ended, and I suspect we will hear more and more about labor in IT. I covered unions in the white-collar portion of IT, and it's here too. Progress and change aren't linear, and instead meander around. This is just a step along the way, and that's the reason to track the changes. Perch Security released their 2021 Perch MSP Threat Report. Over the last year, the report found that just 25% of MSPs that suffered a security breach said it was related to ransomware. However, almost 73% reported that at least one client had experienced a security incident, with nearly 60% of these MSP client incidents involving ransomware. In terms of security budget, more than 82% of MSPs increased their spending last year, while 75% of survey respondents have indicated that their budget for 2021 will increase by an average of 12.1%. Now, why do we care? This data on spending is in alignment with Gartner's data from yesterday's show on overall growth. Good news that the MSPs themselves are being breached with ransomware, not so great on the client front. I included a long read about Zero Trust from Tech Republic for those looking to dig more into Zero Trust security. Of note, according to the researcher, there is no Zero Trust products, just ones that work in a Zero Trust environment. This is also cultural, a combination of HR, privacy experts, and end users. I love the pivot because it's high value. It's not easy to make culture change, and not easy is code for profitable. So, about flexible work. Salesforce has announced it's reopening its offices in San Francisco in May, but employees can work remotely through the end of the year. It's being opened in 3 phases. The first is U.S. employees in areas where coronavirus risk is flat or declining. In context, Forrester has data about the flexible work models. The priority is cutting cost, improving IT support, and purchasing technology to support remote workers. But most importantly, are workers ready? I'm highlighting a piece in Slate around work-related anxieties in regard to the return. In short, many employees are just not happy about it. Concerns over May or June being too early, social anxiety issues, the concept of wearing a mask all day, or lack of consequences for those who don't wear them at all make the list of employee concerns. A theme emerges: lack of trust. Now, why do we care?
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Thanks to Malcolm for that insight, because it's relevant. A year and a bit ago in 2020, businesses had to move quickly to work from home and work from anywhere. It wasn't optional. What's different now is that it is optional. Business leaders have the ability to design and implement any return they want, at any speed they want. In fact, a good business leader now has 2 practical examples to compare, before and now, and can design anything in between. I'm really struck today by how many of the conversations are about the technology or the race to open, and not about what you should do. What builds the best organization to accomplish your business goals? You can do anything you want. Now, what do you do and why? I'd argue you have all the priorities right from Forrester, but the missing and most valuable piece is the decision-making around why. Do that for your own organization, and do that for your customers. The FCC has released a speed test app to measure internet speeds across the U.S. It's available on both Android and iOS. This app is part of the agency's more broad effort to collect more accurate broadband speed data across the country to move away from the self-reporting based maps currently used. This also adds to their addition of a website form for reporting. Now, why do we care? If you're interested in getting better broadband in your community, reporting data to the FCC is the way to do it. If you're in IT services, you have a significant reach to your customers. You can choose now to be part of this solution, so a heads up. Microsoft is acquiring Nuance in an all-cash transaction valued at $19.7 billion. This is Microsoft's second largest purchase ever, behind LinkedIn. The acquisition is focused on cloud, but more specifically, healthcare. Nuance delivers solutions in the AI and clinical intelligence space. So why do we care? So I didn't cover this first out of the gate, and that was intentional. I wanted to think this one over to answer the question. Rather violates my rule about caring about acquisitions. One easy note is that this buys a lot of Azure users. I'm super bullish on voice. I have been for a while. Ambient computing is the reason. The ability to talk to systems and have them available anywhere you need them. This technology, focused on helping record and transcribe doctors' conversations with patients that goes right into the notes, is exactly that. A computer that listens as you work, keeps the notes and records for you, and associates them with the appropriate files. Yes, please. The healthcare investment is the obvious growth area, but you can see this technology being used in a lot of areas. We care because it's an investment in both healthcare and ambient computing. I wanted to give that some thought, and yes, that's the why. So, the FBI got court approval to access Exchange servers around the US that were vulnerable to attack. And they did. They removed web shells left behind by hackers, and they did it without prior notification in a proactive step. This was done via a search warrant, where the FBI used the warrant to access the still compromised servers, copy the web shell as evidence, and then remove the web shell from the server. The FBI stated that they believed the owners of the still compromised web servers did not have the technical ability to remove them on their own, and that the shells posed a significant risk to the victim. There was a specific concern that notifying the owners could compromise the operation, and so they were granted notification to be delayed until after the operation was finished. While we're talking about Exchange, there's a new vulnerability announced on Tuesday, the 13th. So why do we care? I've made my position clear that warrants are both the existing and well-known way to handle government actions. While my hot take was a bit of outrage, the more I considered this, the more I think this is still logical. Let's make this physical. The police are aware of a break-in at a local business. They investigate with a warrant and find that, yes, the business was breached, and there's a device attached to the cash register that takes currency and puts it aside for the robbers. The police, having identified the crime, they would turn the device off, right? You'd want them to do that. I know I would, particularly if they have the skills, and I don't. Sure, it's a stretched analogy, but you get the point. There's a desire on law enforcement's part to be proactive. That's a change, and that's why we care.
Want to ask, why do we care? T-shirts, stickers, water bottles, and even aprons. Pick up some of our great stuff at the link in the description below and support the show directly.
Another new tech worker union story. The tech workers at the New York Times have formed one under the News Guild of New York. The Tech Times Guild represents 650 workers from the digital side of the business, including software engineers and data analysts. The editorial union covers the reporters and media professionals, also under News Guild. Now, why do we care? So I'm stringing together the union stories here. The New York Times has a significant digital business. They are a tech company too, although one that has a legacy brand and business. And their workers are unionizing. There's a shift going on in labor. I'll admit not seeing the end game for this yet, but the status quo isn't going to last. Some data from the UK about small business IT spend from Gigacom, Digital Wholesale Solutions, and Union Street. Nearly 70% of SMB leaders feel overwhelmingly positive about the prospects for their businesses moving forward. Additionally, 2 in 3 at 67% are confident in their company's growth prospects through 2021. And 94% of business leaders recognize changes are required to support working from home. The SMBs outlined 4 immediate priorities: making collaboration work long-term, fixing home broadband, deploying a cloud or hosted phone system, and bringing together collaboration and communications. But just like the story earlier this summer, there's data in the US about well-being concerns. Nearly 60% of workers report concerns about stress and burnout. 1/3 fear for their physical well-being, including getting sick. Another third worry about social wellness and belonging. And despite all this, survey data says participation in mental health programs and employee assistance programs has dropped. Meanwhile, the PC market had a great first quarter after a great 2020. This despite the global chip shortage. Gartner is estimating shipments of traditional PCs are up 32% compared with Q1 of 2020. And IDC says it's 55% growth year over year. Yes, Q1 of 2020 was rough, so that number may be inflated, but both research companies say it'll keep going. Cisco is telling us what they think are priorities from IT leaders, citing cloud applications, network security, and multi-cloud infrastructure. As for those multiple clouds, per Cloud Security Alliance's research, 62% of respondents do have multiple clouds. The most popular is AWS at 67%, Azure at 65%, and Google Cloud Platform at 37%. Now, why do we care? I talked about this earlier in the week, and I'm struck by the notion that for every article about the business leader positioning, there's an alternate side of concern among employees. I've also been covering unions in tech more, and while I'm not directly covering it, Jeff Bezos wrote his last shareholder letter today. A good chunk of it was about employees. There's a space to be very competitive around culture and company you build with employees, particularly in small companies. The two aren't disparate. If you want to execute, you need your people. Investments there really do pay off. The U.S. has expelled 10 diplomats and placed a range of sanctions on Russian individuals and assets in response to the SolarWinds hack. A number of private sector cybersecurity firms in Russia are also being sanctioned for their work in supporting government efforts. Now, why do we care? That's a simple update for sure, but the implications are wide here. Governments are going to be setting new norms about what is considered allowable and what isn't. It's also going to include laws around what is defined, but the social norms and practices matter. IT services companies should care about those norms, as they're the base we'll work off of. Remember the case in 2015 of the San Bernardino shooting and how the FBI needed to unlock that iPhone for evidence? Well, now we know how they did it. The Washington Post gave us the method, quoting the NextWeb. Luckily for the FBI, a small Australian firm called Azimuth Security stepped up with a solution. The challenge was the agency only had a certain number of chances to guess the phone's passcode. After the limit of failed passcodes attempt was reached, the device would automatically erase its data. Azimuth essentially found a vulnerability in a piece of software written by Mozilla to gain access to the system. It subsequently chained 2 more exploits together to take over the phone's processor and run their own programs on it. At this point, Azimuth's employees devised a piece of software to test every possible passcode combination without causing the phone to erase its own data, and eventually unlock the device. The end result? They didn't find anything useful for the investigation at a cost of $900,000 in fees. Now, why do we care? It was understanding how they did it that was interesting to me initially, and then it was about the cost-benefit analysis of doing it. That was a lot of fuss about nothing. But let's ask the other question. Was it worth $900,000 to learn something? If the investigation had come back with information, was that worth it? I'm not sure I have an answer, but that's the question we care about asking. Amazon has released data on their racial and gender makeup as a company. As of December 31st, the company is 31.4% female, 7.2% black, and 47% white. The senior leadership is 22.8% female and 3.8% black. It's also 70% white. The company wants to double black leadership in 2021 and increase women in senior technical roles by 30%. Now, why do we care? Compared with this own podcast's Q1 Leadership Diversity Report, Amazon is outperforming the industry. 1.5% better on black leadership and 14% less white leaders. It's about 3% better on female leadership. This is becoming a data-driven conversation. In my mind, that's very positive. Are you participating? Taking us into the weekend with an oddball one, esports. I promise I'm going somewhere with this. The Overwatch League, having been forced to readjust their physical matches due to the coronavirus into Asian and North American divisions in 2020, has announced a plan to allow teams to compete. The answer? North American teams using Hawaii as a location. Network latency is a huge factor in esports, and the teams studied undersea cables and used a research tool to test for the optimal 90-second millisecond lag. Hawaii offers no additional visa requirements for US-based players, a safe environment for health and safety, and hit the mark for the required latency. Now, why do we care? This is network engineering meets business outcomes. That's what we see here. The design and execution combines both the technical requirements and couples that with the needs of the business. But listen to the solution. It combined the employee needs around health and safety and travel requirements with the technical ones. That's why I highlight it. The mindset of a good IT services firm versus one just addressing the technology. Thanks for tuning in to This Week in the Business of Tech. Shows come out each week, pulling together the daily podcast. If you like this show, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. The content here is possible because of supporters like you. If you want access to shows early, answers to your questions, and private interactions, join our Patreon. It's pay what you want. You decide what the content is worth. Join at patreon.com/MSPradio. Patreons also get access to the written versions of every story as they come out. If you want the stories right away, you can get them on the daily podcast. Find The Business of Tech on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your shows. Subscribe links at businessof.tech, and I'll talk to you again next week.